Everyone ready?
Good morning.
Let's go.
Okey doke. Councilmember Harris.
Here.
Councilmember Jeruso.
Here.
Councilmember King. Councilmember Green. Councilmember Thomas. We have 3 members. We have a quorum.
Okay, I'd like to go ahead and move to approve the minutes of the last meeting. Seconded by Councilmember King. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone watching on TV. Today is Thursday, September 8th, and the 7th Quality of Life meeting for 2022. Today's meeting will focus entirely on blight. You see it in every council district, and we've actually compiled from every district the top 10 blighted houses in their districts. But first, I'd like to just give a refresher on public comment. Public comments can be submitted online beforehand or in person. It'll be limited to 1 comment per person per item and 2 minutes max. There's no voting today, so we'll just go ahead and get started. So I'd like to set the table by calling up Tullis Mulligan. And Councilmember Green has joined us for the record. Mr. Mulligan, will you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. Thomas Mulligan. I'm the director of the Department of Code Enforcement. I also serve as Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for Business and External Services.
Okay, so I'd like to go ahead and set the table before we get into the specific slideshows. My office and you had a win yesterday on Laurel Street. There was a property that had been sitting blighted for 17 years. And I'd like for you to just tell the public how a property could be blighted, or why it takes so long currently to get a property demolished or out of blight situation.
Yes, ma'am. Each case is different. So a blighted property may have minor problems, minor defects, could have graffiti, for example. That's a form of blight. And so the process by which that will be remedied is different from 2616 Laurel Street, which is a property that posed a so-called imminent danger to life, health, property, and public safety. And so in the case of this particular property, which fell under that criterion, which is in 26242, section 26242 of the city code, the Department of Code Enforcement can take quicker action. And so it's been on our radar for some time. Earlier this year, in response to your office and citizen complaints, we took another look at the property, which did have parts falling off of the roof, off the side of the building. It was being used for criminal activity. There were vagrants staying in really what was just the shell of a building. And so our inspectors took a look, our senior inspector took a look, and we did think that it qualified for emergency demolition as a result of those conditions. I concurred with that assessment, and the Director of Safety and Permits, Tammy Jackson, concurred. And then we moved against that property, and we did demolish it, as you say, yesterday. I'll say our preference is always to try to retain a structure, especially a multifamily structure like that. And we did try to work with this owner extensively in good faith, offering a path to rehabilitation, to bringing that property back into commerce. There was a hearing last month in front of a hearing officer, an impartial adjudicative official, who also issued a demolition order, essentially concurring with our finding of imminent danger. But at the end of the day, we didn't see enough progress towards abating those imminent danger conditions. And so I made the decision to demolish it.
Well, I know the residents were very happy about that. I guess what I really want to do is just take a couple steps back. And if you could just outline the process of blight adjudication and the various steps. So again, people have a full understanding of why it might take so long to get a blighted property either back into commerce or demolished.
Sure. So it will go down 2 paths. So first, if it is designated an imminent danger condition, it falls under those emergency authorities, and we can take action quickly. Now, there's always the potential for legal involvement, somebody taking entering a lawsuit, a district court, or taking an appeal to a hearing officer judgment. That can make things longer, but in general, the emergency demolition happens quickly. Now, in the case of less significant, less dangerous blight, we have to go before our hearing officer and we have to get a judgment. We'll give a resident some time to fix the problems on his or her property. That's always the best way to get the problems of blight abated, having a responsible owner fix whatever the conditions are. If that's not done, typically we'll hold another hearing where we will levy very serious fines, tens of thousands of dollars, so-called daily fines hearing. And once that's done and we don't see a path forward with the owner, we'll generally do one of two things. So one, we'll demolish the building. Again, it's our preference not to do that, especially if the problems are relatively minor. Or second, we'll put the property up to auction through the sheriff's office and get it in the hands of a responsible owner. Now, I will say even that is not guaranteed to fix things. So we've had a case in District C, Councilmember King's district, 1338 Music Street, where somebody bought this property a few months back, which had been blighted for a long time, for $100,000. And we haven't seen the sort of progress we would like to see from that new owner, although we have seen some progress. So even sheriff's sale is not a silver bullet. And really, once it gets to the point where we've levied very serious fines and the owner hasn't abated it, then it becomes an internal conversation. Do we try to work with the owner more? Do we demolish? Do we go to sheriff's sale? And this is especially when public input's very important.
Okay, thank you for setting the table. I'd like to turn it over to Councilmember Giarrusso. The order of business will be that we'll go through each district alphabetically and then come back with questions for you.
Okay, well, I guess Councilmember Harris, do you want me to do two things? I have not only my presentation on all the blight in District A, but also the proposed revisions. And I know we have people who are going to speak today. So I'll take in any order that you want to.
Let's go through the blighted properties first, and then we can go through just so we can keep a good flow going.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
All right. So one of the things that has surprised me as the budget chair and speaking to all of my district colleagues was not only their particular interest, but the fact that blight was at the top of everybody's list with whom I spoke up here. And I know that we remain committed, Mr. Mulligan, to get $1 million to code enforcement next week for additional demolitions. I think the problem, however, has been that there are a number of blighted properties across the city and in the district. And I think my last slide or close to it will demonstrate one of the problems we have. So this is 3220 General Ogden. The owner lives in California. You can see you have the minimum property management case numbers on there. The last case was closed in 2014, so 8 years ago. And there's been another 311 requests inspected. And before I go any further, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think we all agree that blight is unsightly in any neighborhood where it occurs, that it prevents people from feeling good about their neighborhood, that there was a relationship between blight and crime, and where you have blighted properties, also we're not returning them to commerce when they could be, particularly as I can say it correctly, Giardulo pointed out regularly, that we can return these and make them housing units that are available to help reduce the affordable housing crisis. All right, the next one is 2929 Cherry. Again, this has been referred to the lot abatement for assignment to vendor. I hate to say for Holly Grove, Leonidas, in many places, this is kind of the rule as opposed to the exception. Next slide, please. 8827 Olive. This case has been open for 4 years now. Last hearing date was a year ago. Next step is inspection documentation. And so nothing has happened in 5 years. Next slide. 9010 Olive, inspection is needed. No current case, 311 request made. Next one, please, Anita. 3201 Hamilton, you can see not only the blight, but all of the trash also on the side, which is a collateral issue when you have all of these blighted properties. They also become, I think my colleagues will agree, places where you can have dumping as well once there's the blight. Title research is where, can you go back for 1 second, Anita? Next status is title research, which is also a place where these matters get hung up. Okay, next one, please. 8626 Palmetto. The hearing date was held within the last month. The initial inspection was in June. Posting of judgment is what we're waiting on. So you can't do anything until the judgment is actually posted and everything has happened. And we want to make sure that we follow the legal rules, as Mr. Mulligan pointed out, not to get people in trouble. Next one. All right, 5700 Vicksburg. This has been an issue since Hurricane Katrina. And I see people in the audience who are here to speak about it. That is just the pool. That is not even the house itself, which looks like it is ready to be demolished. And this is an absolute case of somebody who knows the system and skirting it repeatedly. And I know you know this, but what happened was it went through the process once again, got to the very end, and then the owner bought it back at sheriff's sale for $17,000. I contend that if they had a daily fines set and that was accruing daily before we got to the sheriff's sale, that would be a greater poison pill to prevent people from allowing this to happen repeatedly. I can't stress enough, this has been since 2005. This is not a year or 2 years. This is Hurricane Katrina, and people are living right next to it. They actually had a 16th birthday party, a sweet 16 birthday party for it. So the neighbors are extraordinarily frustrated, as all neighbors are, but given the fact that this has been a repeat offender for such a long time, and the fact that the pool isn't filled in and that the house isn't demolished is problematic. Next one, please. Another pool in Lakeview, 5965 Memphis, abandoned, no fencing, obviously unfiltered, all violations, all by law, might I add, defined as an emergency, so it should be. So that's not taken care of. It can be filled in immediately without any process. Next slide. This is 335 Kenilworth. This one's a little bit newer to me. Current inspection documentation dated almost 5 years ago, still in title research. Next slide. Back to Uptown, 7104 Coliseum. And of course, as I said earlier, one of the problems when you have property sometimes is all of this junk that is on the side of it. That's part of the legislation that we're proposing to fix. Do I have any more? Next slide, please. General Ogden. This has been through obviously 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different iterations. I drove actually by this one on Monday. I was prepared, actually, Mr. Mulligan, to call you about it. You can't see from the first picture, but there was fairly new sheet / particle board hanging out in there. And given the fact that they applied for a permit, I'm going to, excuse me? Yeah, right. Well, right. I mean, yeah, Councilmember Thomas is whispering in my ear about how people skirt the rules and what's going on. But I'm going to, since it's right across the street from where I have one of my neighborhood meetings, this one catches my eye on a monthly basis. Next one. All right, Eagle Street fire. Again, sort of like 5900 Vicksburg, 17 years of reported blight. Neighbors reported homeless encampment in the properties. And then the properties caught on fire. We had to do research on this for the media, who blew us up for a day as this was happening. And if I remember correctly, it was literally every single 2 years that this was in minimum property management. The bare minimum happened, the owner got out of it, and it remains in this condition. I think that's it for me. But that is, and by the way, relative to my colleagues, District A is fortunate in the sense that it tends to have more fluency and not some of the issues with resource allocation. And so I think some of my colleagues, particularly to my right, are going to be stressing the need for blight improvement in their areas that need it as much, if not more. Councilmember Harris, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Jeruso. We're now going to go through District B properties. We actually documented 38. We could document many, many more. But Anita, if you could roll through this. This is 2119 Washington Avenue. This is the Washington Gardens property. Case number 21 MPMP. This is actually in my neighborhood. Back in June of 2022, the electricity was turned off with tenants still occupying the building. The city had to step in and actually move the tenants out on the city's own dime. And this is one of those Josh Bruno properties. Again, I drive by it every single day and there's no fencing or anything to prevent people from coming into the property. And so there is illegal activity happening at 2119 Washington Avenue. This is 1204 Simone Boulevard Avenue. You can see the case number, current status, fines levied, lien added. This is right from Gust Homes. And if you look at the front of the property, it seems okay, but the back of the property is completely collapsing. Again, I drove by this today. There are people who are loitering outside. It seems to have some drug activity around it and inside of it. So people are actually entering the front part that's not collapsed and doing what they do. So this is top on my list of getting demolished. And unfortunately, it has some pretty architectural features, but I think at this point in time, it's unsalvageable. Anita? This is 2431 Phillips Street, case number 18-10208 MPM, pending title research, and the next status is an administrative hearing. A resident brought this property and adjoining overgrown lots to my office's attention. The blighted property is in terrible condition and is overgrown with vines, with tires and debris scattered in front of it. The property is a major deterrent to the quality of life of this neighborhood, and the current status, as I said, is pending title research. This is 2315 and 2317 St. Andrews Street. And this is one of two properties that one of my favorite constituents, Michael Burnside, has frequently documented with my office's Director of Community Engagement and reported to code enforcement multiple times. According to Michael Burnside, the front porch of the structure may have been constructed in the 1860s, and it was on the Historical Society's list of endangered historical structures a couple of years ago. But it has been further damaged by Hurricane Ida and is frequently used as a drug den. The property frequently attracts abandoned tires, debris, trash, and from the photos, you can see that the back of the building looks to be in danger of collapse. And is a true hazard to this community. August 15, 2022, fines were levied in the amount of $3,500, and the next status is for a daily fines hearing after the expiration of the appeals period. This is an adjacent property that Michael Burnside brought to my attention. Again, it's used daily by drug users. The property is sat empty probably since OT was council person of District B. But you can see that the front and the side are completely open to the elements. The current status is that on August 15th, 2022, fines were levied in the amount of $5,500, and the next status is for a daily fines hearing after expiration of the appeals period. This is 4824 Thalia Street. Together, Gerttown Neighborhood Association sent my office many properties in the Gerttown area, which tends to be a poor Black area, and unfortunately where blight exists. This property was reported to code enforcement, and they couldn't locate any information about this property in their database. And as you can see from the photos, the sides of the property are basically just plywood. The structure in front has been damaged and is overgrown with vines, and my office has been told that the property will be inspected and could potentially be demolished. Also in Gerttown, identified by Together Gerttown, is 7109 Edinburgh Street. It's located next to the 2nd District Police Station, so our police officers have to look at this property daily. The property is covered in graffiti, vines, and the roof seems to have been caving in. And so the current status is that a judgment was rendered, and the next status is a request for a daily fines hearing. Another property in the Gerttown neighborhood is next door at 7109. It seems that the grass has been maintained, but parts of the building are open to the elements, and there's also illegal dumping that we've personally witnessed occurring next to it, which is a common theme, as Joe said, with a lot of these properties that are sitting blighted. This is 3427, 3429 Barone Street. The Delachaise Neighborhood Association sent my office this property as a priority in their neighborhood. According to Donna Robertson, the president of DNA, the property has been in deplorable condition for several years. It's been like that for so long that nobody can actually remember how long it's looked like this. Again, probably since OT's days back in District B. And because it's so neglected, it's a magnet for trash, and people are just throwing trash, and it does seem that it is occupied by people who are not supposed to be in it. And the final property is 3316 4th Street. This is in District B and was reported by the Hoffman Triangle Neighborhood Association. One of the neighbors has cited this property as a danger to the community. It's a magnet for illegal activity, and the current status is that a judgment was rendered. The next status is a request for a daily fines hearing. I have more, Thomas, and we sent that list to you, including Plaza Tower. Shall we move to district? We have District C properties.
I don't have any pictures submitted. That's my fault. Huh? They're in my head. Nah, just miscommunication. We didn't get them in time, but I didn't get them in time. But Mr. Mulligan, first of all, you and your staff have taken tours of District C, East and West Bank. You know the hot spots. 2800 selling in the cutoff on the corner. That's like the number one for me. 2600 St. Claude, the old Frankie and Johnny. There's an empty lot in between that, and there's a blighted house next to that. We were out there Tuesday, and that is a place of a high crime area, and it's become a large homeless encampment with tents, and this is on St. Claude, a major thoroughfare in the city. And we also have the 1300 block of Music Street in the Marigny area. I know this has also been, it's 1338 Music Street, and in the Marigny area, Marigny/St. Roch has been a high problematic issue for a long time. It's been going through the code enforcement process for many, many years. So those are just a few, but you've driven the streets with me. Your staff have driven the streets with me. We were successful in getting a lot of properties knocked down. Think about 8 so far. Thank you. 8 so far this year knocked down. But I have a question that I want to ask, and it says, Mr. Mulligan, we tried searching for the code enforcement budget in the city's 2022 budget, and it appeared to be mixed in the Office of Community Development. VCC, City Planning, Safety and Permits, all of these departments have their own standalone budgets in the citywide budget. Can you tell us why it makes sense for code enforcement to be an exception? And wouldn't it make more sense for code enforcement to have its own budget the same way these other departments do?
Well, thank you, Councilmember King. It is true that our budgetary situation is a bit different from some of the other OBES departments. And, one thing I'll say is OBES is a relatively recent organization. I could talk about it at length and why I think it's quite valuable. So it may be a good time to revisit the sort of issue you're mentioning. We are aware of that internally. Code enforcement one thing people should be aware of is code enforcement doesn't receive taxpayer support, local taxpayer support. We do receive HUD funding, so it is indirect in that way, but almost all of our budget is either from HUD or self-generated through our hearings and through our sheriff's sale. And the particular issue you mentioned with our budget housed within Office of Community Development, we are great partners with OCD. They're absolutely invaluable. For example, when it comes to helping us move residents out of a blighted building. But it does pose administrative and logistical hurdles, especially when it comes to filling positions, processing promotions, ensuring that we have a competent and capably equipped staff within code enforcement. And so I do agree, and I have spoken to the relevant people about this, that it is important that code enforcement have its own independent budget.
Well, my last comment is while riding with code enforcement, one of the enforcers stated how they're riding in a 2008 vehicle with a very low AC. It was in the summertime, and they have to open the door by reaching on the outside of the driver door.
Yep.
And the comment was, how am I supposed to pull up to somebody's home or property and tell them that their property is out of compliance when I can't open my door from the inside? I got to reach on the outside, and I'm sweating profusely because my AC doesn't work properly. So I just think we need to get code enforcement budget bulked up, and hopefully we can get more blighted properties reduced if we do that. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Shall we roll on to District D?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mulligan. First, before I go into the properties, because we've worked well with your office, and I happen to be a property manager from a long time ago. I know how difficult it is to tear something down, the processes that you have to go through, the legal impediments that have been put in place, plus the physical demolition itself. So between working with your office, putting pressure on private property owners and doing the work yourself, we've been able to get some demolition done in District D, and I appreciate it. That said, I will also say the challenge of certain areas is the lack of growth in those areas. And in District D alone, there are about 750 blighted properties, whether it be a blighted lot or a blighted physical structure. So to those who might be watching and see that I picked out 10 particular properties, I'll talk about why I did so. But it's important to recognize that while there are areas of District D that have no blight, north of Allen, Tucson, no blighted houses there, not much blight in the Gentilly area near Paris Avenue, for example, Fillmore, areas like that, Prentice. But then when I go to the Desire area, which is also in the district, the students from Carver have to come out across the street and look at tons and tons of vacant properties. I also express a concern to you, and I didn't put it up here, and you can kind of look into it, that there are also some city-owned blighted properties. And that is okay. Councilman Jerusalem is going to talk about it. I will tell you, that is also one of my biggest challenges when I talk to people about what they need to do across the street from a city-owned blighted property. So, Mr. Mulligan, one thing that we have asked, and while we're addressing mid-year budgets, is tell the council what you need. If we asked you today, what could be done to solve all of the blight throughout our city in terms of the demolitions, at least? I know that we could do some renovations. Tell us what you need. Don't be afraid to tell us what you need, because it is such a concern in certain neighborhoods. And interestingly enough, in neighborhoods that are growing, there's still a lot of blight. But then again, I emphasize this, the challenges of District D are sometimes the challenges in our city. You can be within 10 minutes of an area that has absolutely no blight, and then be in an area where there's 1 out of every 3 properties blighted. I know it's a concern. I'm looking to work with you, and maybe the federal government can help. So I'll ask us to feel free to take a look at the map. There are strategic reasons that I would have mentioned any property that's in here. And one of the strategic reasons, for example, is this particular property is on an area of growth in the city. We have new construction in certain places. We have people renovating their houses, but this particular property is an example of one that's about to collapse. The front is a hazard to children and anybody who should be passing by. And it happens to be a 2-story house that, if it did come forward, would come over the fence. So just take a look at that as you go along. The next property is at 4109 and 4117. One of those challenges in our city, because it's 2 blocks from Bayou St. John, 2 blocks from City Park. Sometimes it doesn't make any sense what people are holding on to. It's also, unfortunately, right across the street from McDonald 35. So every high school student whose parent drops them off or who goes there has to see this property. It's overgrown, and these pictures sometimes don't do it enough justice because the doors are open and the windows are open, and children have to feel that it's not as important for them to have their area look as good as it is in other areas. And sometimes they don't understand that it has to do with economics, it has to market and the like. But I think that you're aware of this property, 4109 and 17. I'd appreciate you giving special attention to that property. 1941 North Johnson, I think it speaks for itself, and it's so unfortunate because this house, if renovated, could be something that it would be attractive to our citizens, to attractive to the neighborhood. But you can see it has a big hole in the front of it, and it's just in terrible disrepair. But again, some of my properties that I point out, the 10 amongst the hundreds that are there, are because I'm concerned about children and the way they feel about their neighborhoods and the way they feel about walking through their particular property. And this is an example of some property that's so easy to access that we need to do something right away. North Prior Street, I have it on there because it's an area of significant growth, but unfortunately there's blight in the midst of that growth. But I think it's interesting to point out how they've chosen to take one of the city's signs and put behind their gate. Councilman Thomas, we talked about that once before. Who has the contract for all of these signs? Where do they go? But unfortunately, people use it for their own private purposes sometimes. Okay, if we go to the next one, 1900 Elysian Fields. Think about 1900 Elysian Fields. That's near Galvez, what's that? Main thoroughfare. So tourists who come into our city, who we pride ourselves in attracting, drive Elysian Fields toward our lakefront, drive Elysian Fields from the interstates and go to their hotels and the French Quarter. And this is a property that they see, which is a candidate, of course, for demolition. Again, not necessarily to put you on the spot because there are a lot, but you have to tell us what you need, including if we need to lobby the state for legislation that makes it possible for us to move quicker. I know that we've done so in the past, but even to lobby for funds, even to have a comprehensive program for the city that recognizes how important blight reduction is. On the next page is 1031 North Claiborne Avenue. Recently, the front of the building fell. And so, unfortunately, on that day, on an emergency basis, personnel and police officers, for example, were tied up tearing down the front of the property, which is what you see now. But unfortunately, after that, nothing else was done. So if you drive on Claiborne Avenue right now, or if you walk on Claiborne Avenue, you see a front of a building torn off. You can see everything that's inside of it, and it's across from a homeless encampment. And so I'll tell you right now on the record, there are people who hop the fence and are staying inside the building, and it's very, very, very perilous in terms of the situation relative to our citizens who go inside the property. The next page is 1938 and 40 Industry Street. It's in a historic area of our city, off of AP Turrell. The picture doesn't do it justice, but it's completely open. And because it is, it's the reason that I've focused on it. But it also happens to be near a high school and 2 other elementary schools. And again, the effect that it has on young people in terms of the city not caring, or they understand it to be not caring. We recognize that the market is a severe hindrance, but it's also a lot of people who have done wrong. They haven't done succession, so nobody takes care of the property, or somebody owns it and they live out of town, so they come in once a year, they don't care about it. But as a city, we all know that we can do better. On the next street is a very interesting property, because if I was showing you a Google map, there's a house across the street that's under construction and a house across the street that recently had somebody move in. Clouet Street. And for the record, it's Clouet Street, but that's all right. We'll get into the French. I'll get into the French and some of my.
No, it's not.
Yeah. It's Clouet. It's Jean-Francois Clouet, but okay, that's another thing. 1836 Clouet Street in the 9th Ward. And it's 2 properties that are on the same parcel of land. And you can see, but interestingly enough, I think somebody lives in the front property and it's about to collapse as far as the roof is concerned. We've reported it, and I know that someone living on a property goes beyond your scope, but it's a candidate for demolition because it's in an area where the city could be generating, if you will, tax revenues, because 2 people have already done new property and they're very frustrated by it. Roger Williams is a street in the DeSay area, or DeSax, depending on where you are. The DeSay area, DeSax. It's there's a house behind that overgrowth, and that house is abandoned. And kids go through there after they hop the fence into the openings, and they sometimes go near the house. It's something that we would want to certainly have addressed. The next street is 2204 and 06 Feliciana. That speaks for itself. That's what people see every time they come out. And unfortunately, here's an interesting thing about our city. The house next to it is under construction. So the people who are going to be living there will see that every day until Mr. Mulligan takes care of that one, which I know will be probably pretty soon. But unfortunately, there's a vacant lot in between and there's a new house under construction. When those people move into their house, it'd be nice if 2204 could be taken care of. But I just want to be a little bit redundant. And I think the opportunity, I'm thankful for the opportunity to just share with you at least 10 properties, which would be a priority of mine if we could say, let's go and tear them down tomorrow, because they're going to a state where they're affecting the neighborhood in a negative way. I understand the challenges. I understand the challenges of title, finding the owners. I understand when people don't show up at hearings. I understand that sometimes they come and do the minimum, but it's having such an impact on some of our neighborhoods in terms of the way people feel about their city. Whatever we can do to improve our blight situation, I certainly am, and I know the district councilmen who are here hear about it every day. Whatever we can do to help you, please let us know, including if we have to go before the state. I respect private property rights, but those private property rights also extend to private property owners who are next door to and near these properties, and to students who walk by them every day. But again, I start off where I end where I started off. Thank you, because we've gotten a lot of blight removed. There's a lot more to be done, and I look forward to working with you. And I thank the Quality of Life Committee for this opportunity.
Thank you. Council Member Thomas.
Madam Chair, and thank you. You know, it's ironic, Councilman Giarrusso, the role you've played in listening and watching you over the last couple of years, and our committee chairman has really made this part of her agenda while we're in office. But for you to say that the person who has the least amount of blight in the district has actually taken on this issue to identify blight throughout our city was actually a smart thing to do, because if we don't begin to deal with this cancer, then it spreads to the rest of the community and the rest of the city, where people are really trying to do a good job to keep their area. Ms. Mulligan, thank you. I have not seen, I think more recently, the last couple of months, a more aggressive department working with us, being responsive. And I think people need to know when you have a division of government that though they can't fix anything, that is actually answering the call. You and your staff have done that. Now, would we like to see a lot more done? Absolutely. But what has been done, you have actually been on point. And I want you to know the people in my district, it's actually shown in some new survey information I've gotten, have actually appreciated. So know that we thank you for that. If we could go through the list. 701 Poland Avenue is actually Councilmember King's district. That's the old port of embarkation, which where my dad worked when he got out of the service, and actually lost half of his foot in a work accident there. So if we could go to the next one. 4961 Claiborne. You know, that's the old Jupiter gas station. Growing up, there were a couple of African Americans that owned stores and gas stations, and that was one of them, along with the Bush properties. It's a corridor that thrived at one time, that I think, especially given some of the natural topography in the Lower Ninth Ward and some of the economic aggressiveness that the Lower Ninth Ward Economic Development Committee is doing. If we could begin to deal with that, we could market it as an opportunity for some growth or some business. Next, please. I've done news reports out there. I don't understand how it can just sit like that for months and months without somebody saying, let's do something about, you know, even if we're going to lose in court. And Councilmember Green is someone who worked on reducing the redemption period for 3 years to 18 months. We really didn't do anything. There are other cities where if you have blighted property that affects the quality of life, that actually affects opportunity in the community. There are other cities around this country where they'll seize your property and the state and the courts will back them up. We have an issue here where the states, and now we see with the courts with the STR, I don't know, well, you never want to get crossways with judges, but you know, at some point, we're going to have to begin to have some freedom to control those issues that affect the city of New Orleans a lot differently than other parts of the state, or come up with a statewide initiative where many of these rural and suburban communities are also experience this too. So I think we need to look at that, Councilmember Jerusalem and Madam Chair, as we go into the next session. I know the next session is going to be a fiscal session, but the one after that, we need to have an aggressive, progressive plan to deal with blight statewide. Maybe that'll kind of help us with what we need here. Next property, please. This is another one, man. It looks like a blighted oasis. With the so, I mean, just look at it, right? The palm trees and you know, and the white stucco, and man, you think you're getting off somewhere in Palm Springs, but not, right? And once again, another major thoroughfare. How many hundreds of thousands of millions of people drive I-10 from Jacksonville to Santa Monica and pass by there? Next property, please. Hey, once again, historical blight in an area that's actually kind of ripe with some potential, especially going towards the river. Next one, please. 5808 St. Claude. Sankofa just received their Main Street designation. With the Main Street designation, the potentials and the possibilities for growth are tremendous, especially when we talk about getting outside money to help. That does not help, knowing that that's one of the boundaries that they're operating in, and that they got the Main Street designation for. So we need some attention there. Next, please. Historical blight, historical neglect. Next one, please. And then the thing about these properties are, as we look through the records, they haven't been cited. You know, so I would hope at some point, and what I'd like to ask is that, and I think someone brought it up earlier, you don't want to neglect the city, right? But is there a method you use where you look at social ill plus or versus potential, right? So in areas where there's strong home ownership, a strong commercial interest, I would think, and for folk out there, I would think that we would attack those, we would do what is called the law of concentration. I would think that we would attack those areas to stabilize those communities, right? While we look at those blighted areas that are part of this crime wave. Use a certain methodology to do that?
The short answer is no, we don't use a specific methodology. We get complaints from all sources in all sorts of neighborhoods, and we impartially apply the laws and pursue those cases within just a standard queue, essentially. Now, there is an important caveat to that, which is that we do recognize that there are the sorts of considerations which you just raised. There are areas where we want more economic development, maybe, but where we don't have that expertise in-house and we don't have that expertise, I think working with your office is so important. So it's great to have a presentation like this. You know what's best for your districts. We do, of course, also get priorities from the mayor's office, from economic development, other sources. And so that's a way for us to prioritize. But just in terms of our operations alone, that doesn't play into it. It has to be that external influence that tells us, hey guys, move this to the top of the list.
Well, I think our chairwoman has been brilliant in how she's kind of crescendoed this issue to now. And I think too often you want to jump in on everything at first, but I think she's laid out a method to deal with these issues that gets us to point by point and developing a strategy on how we can deal with it. Couple other things before I finish. In 1920, the city had 506,000 people. In 1960, it had 627,625 people. In 1990, the city had 496,000 people. If I would use the population in 1960, the 627,600, and now that's about a gap of 231,175 people. We have a city whose footprint is built for since 1960, right? Room to accommodate a few 100,000 more people than we have. So why haven't we dealt with a strategy to deal with our footprint, our current population, and how we scale it for growth. And let me say this, why this is important, and Madam Chair, thank you for how you've laid this out. I'm not being facetious when I say that we have a footprint now that we hoped we had another 231,000 people, but vagrants are seizing more property than the city. The most aggressive move in this city is by people, transients coming here saying, we're taking this and we're taking that, and it's prohibiting our ability to go out and fix it and put it back into commerce. Just look, drive around. So the most aggressive move at seizing and taking property is coming from people who got a bus pass here. I don't think that's the way we want to do it. So I think we have to step up our aggressiveness and for what do we need to do with the law? What do we need to do to clear and clean property? Because blight equals a certain element, and that element has been aggressive at seizing parts of our city. Thank you.
I'd like to go ahead and open it up to any other council members, and then I'll save my questions for last, because as Councilmember Green often says, there are questions that other people have that spark questions. So Councilmember Giarrusso.
Okay, so I guess a couple things to start off with, more on a macro level, which is I'd be more than happy to work with the administration, Councilmember King, anybody else on some charter changes, because I think code enforcement being its own department is one that makes a lot of sense. I've also said that the fact that the council doesn't get the budget until November 1, then we have to vote on December 1st, and then we have to wait 5 days is kind of outdated now. So I'm happy to work on that. To Councilmember Green's point, Councilmember Moreno is also working on an ordinance about blight of city properties and helping maintain the database associated with that so people can see it more clearly and then what's being done to remedy it, because I think your point is well taken, Councilmember Green, on that. And then the other thing is, I think we all need to support Representative Freeman, who's had bills multiple years regarding raising of fees, particularly with demolitions and permitting issues, that for some reason has not gotten the support of the city. And so I don't understand why, but I think if we need to have some changes, just like we've implemented with HDLC, then this is the opportunity to do it. So with that said, I'm going to try and walk through as quickly as I can some changes that we are leading on with all of my colleagues' help. Particularly want to say thank you to Amanda Rizzo in my office, who has been quarterbacking this, along with Holly Friedman and Anita Curran as well. So I'm going to go through each thing about as quickly as I possibly can. In section 636, the procedure for hearing, we're going to amend the definition of owner so that owner also includes agents, occupants, and lessees. And the reason for that obviously is sometimes the owner's doing everything right, but it's the person who's the tenant who's actually causing the problem. So let's make sure that we have everybody at the table who needs to be. We have a lot of things in here about notice and making sure people get notice correctly. But this one I think is the most important to me, which is that we're not settling the daily fines hearings quickly enough. I mean, and Mr. Mulligan, this isn't you. This has been something that has predated you, but it's been in my craw for 4.5 years. And so now daily fines are going to be set at the initial hearing, and then a date for a subsequent daily fines hearing to be set within 60 days. Because if we really need to address the issues that are on any of the streets the council members raise, the way to do it is by making sure people are being fined daily and early who do this. And again, this is not to punish Miss May and Dixon, who makes a single mistake. It's not to be weaponized by one neighbor against another neighbor. Right. It's for, Councilmember Thomas said, it's for the habitual folks, the people who game the system frequently. All right, next section is 637 penalties. Often, as is the case with apartment complex, single parcel of land includes multiple buildings. To the complex Councilmember Thomas raised, we're going to propose giving the code code inspectors more teeth by requiring that each violation on each unit of building will be counted as a separate violation. So let's say you have 3 different complexes on a parcel and one of the complexes has a problem, it may only be 1 violation. By doing it this way, if there's 20 units that are affected, you have 20 violations instead of 1. That's really, I call that the slumlord rule. And that's the way that we really go after people who are acting inappropriately. And
First name Hallie, last name Luya.
there you go. And you know, at the end is what I call the OT rule. Next one is revisions to 26242. Mr. Mulligan talked a little bit about this, but we're going to tighten it up even more. Emergency procedures. As I showed in 3201 Hamilton and 7104 Coliseum, often hazardous household waste is allowed to pile up on somebody's property. We're going to start deeming that to be emergencies as well. Not only is it dangerous to have improperly stored gasoline or paint thinners in general, that threat is even higher during hurricane season. And with the uptick in precipitation, there's an increased chance that these dangerous chemicals can enter our drainage system. And the last council has said that if you improperly pollute that drainage system, you could be fined up to $5,000. To address significant importance to me and to build on my 2019 amendment to pools, today we're proposing that after 8 days have passed following the posting of notice, the city shall enter the premises to fill in an unfiltered or unfenced pool. This change will also be reflected in 26448, city authorization to remediate improperly secured pools or pools with stagnant waters for threats to the public's health, safety, and welfare. As I pointed out on the Vicksburg property, you know, water can get very easily in there, and then it attracts all sorts of mosquitoes, rats, and other things that are easily part of what becomes an additional part of a code enforcement fine. Through a Section 66 process, a property can be brought into compliance more quickly, thus improving the quality of life for those living near a nuisance property. And we're also proposing several amendments and expansions of several Section 66 provisions. Additionally, in Section 66-258, we'd like to increase the effectiveness of the deputized city employees of sanitation, public works, code enforcement, and homeland security in their work to reduce blight. We've expanded 66-258 to include the authority for proper individuals to issue a nuisance citation, servants of which is satisfied by affixing the citation conspicuously to the structure. And that complies with due process rules. Next, 66-312, duty to maintain plant growth, remove debris and graffiti. Our proposed amendment expands the duty to cut the grass and remove all trash and debris to occupants and lessees. We've also added the continuing duty for owners, occupants, and lessees to remove graffiti from their property. And then the failure to comply result in imposition of a fine in addition to any cost for remediation that's chosen to be enacted. And then the last two are Section 66-315. A failure to comply with non-compliance allows the city to perform any and all corrective abatement without requiring additional notification. Cost for any remediation borne by the city shall be built to the owner. This is for grass cutting, obviously. We've also amended to add the requirements after city is forced to abate tall grass 3 consecutive times. The owner, occupant, lessee may be required to engage and provide evidence of a valid and current contract for lawn care services. I mean, you guys shouldn't have to do it all the time and we're wasting our money. And if somebody, again, just thinks they're going to free ride off the city about cutting grass, we're going to put a stop to that. And then the last one is what I call the OT rule, which is Section 150-973. This potentially revokes or allows for the non-renewal of an occupational alliance license for those who haven't complied with the building codes, which include Chapter 26 in the Milton Property Code. I mean, the bottom line is you can't get the occupational license. Right, exactly. You can't
Litter abatement is part of it.
Right. I mean, and look, you can't get your license if it isn't maintained properly. You can't move it if it's not maintained properly. So why should you be able to renew if you're not doing the work correctly? I mean, I think, you know, Councilmember Thomas, to the point you're making, we don't want to ever run afoul when we know we're going to break the law. But if there are areas where we think that we can improve quality of life that aren't illegal, and that, you know, certainly if you've had too many DWIs, you can't get your license to drive, you don't have the correct eyeglasses, you can't drive, then to me, it seems like the same thing should apply for people who can't do their work to keep their property clean. So I ran through that fairly quickly. You know, my plan is to file the legislation on the 15th, so it'd be held over, but I think that's a fairly good summation. And my understanding is that all of the district council members support moving this forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Jeruso. Any other comments? All right, so I'm going to invoke my Eugene Green hat and ask about staffing. I know that we talked yesterday in advance of this meeting, and I want you to talk about the current level of staffing and the challenges that you have and what we may do as City Council to help you out with staffing.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So as you say, I'll just really address what Councilmember Green asked, which is how we can do our job better. And I had a chance to observe code enforcement externally as the chief of staff for OBES for about 8 or 9 months. And I've now had a chance to evaluate its operations as its director. And there's no question in my mind that the most important challenge we face, and the number one thing we need to do to fight blight in our city, is staff up. We have now, I guess, about 38 employees. Found out yesterday we're losing one of our researchers, unfortunately. And the problem we face is the same problem a lot of city agencies face, a lot of entities in general face, which is this extremely tight labor market. I do think salaries are an important component, and I think the mayor has put forth an excellent plan to address that. Another challenge we face is some of the constraints which are put on us when it comes to selecting people for jobs, the requirements that they have to have, who can be in an unclassified spot, who cannot, how those positions work. Just to give one example, in order to be an inspector, you need to either have a college degree or have 2 years of real estate or construction experience. And that's not necessary. What we need in an inspector is somebody who's going to put in a full day's work, who's going to be a good trainee, who's going to learn the job and be honest and get us the information we need to bring cases against derelict properties. And so I've said this before, I want to be able to go to a high school, a senior class, and say, hey, you're going to graduate here in a few months, and we've got a good job waiting for you in code enforcement. And you're maybe aren't going to get rich, but you're going to get a good benefits package. You're going to be helping your city, and we're going to set you up for a good career here in New Orleans. And I can't do that currently because of the constraints which are put on me when it comes to hiring. So I think that's very important. And just generally speaking, the more flexibility I can have in hiring people who I judge and my supervisors judge will be the best people for the job, the better. An element of this is, as Councilmember King alluded to, the budget. We need to be able to focus on our operations, do our job in code enforcement. You know, what we do isn't particularly complicated. We knock down buildings, we cut grass, we inspect buildings, we do research. That's essentially all of it. When law gets involved, it gets more complicated, but 90% of the job we do is straightforward. And one of the things, and I'll talk about this a little later, which I've really stressed within the department, and which I will stress within OBES, is an operational focus. We're not involved in pie in the sky policy development. We will certainly take on that input where appropriate. We're here to do the job that's been assigned to us under the law. And that's how I see it. And I think that approach and that philosophy has paid some dividends. So that's the most important thing. It is true that there are internal changes we need to make. I'll talk about those related to internal process, technology, and that sort of thing, but those are marginal improvements. The major challenge which faces me and which faces my management is staffing. And it's a challenge in a lot of ways. There's no simple solution, but anything we can do to provide good compensation to the hardworking people of the department, give us flexibility in hiring and making sure people know their work is appreciated would make a big difference.
I think that you should go ahead and talk about the other challenges, process, you said tech issues, so that we can just get your challenges out in front of everybody and then go back in.
Sure, of course. So most important personnel in the budget situation, I think I've touched on that. In terms of smaller issues I want to address, first is intake. So we get dozens of complaints every day from 311, from the code enforcement email address. Every council member's office sends us complaints. I get complaints directly, our council liaison. We get phone calls, we get walk-ins, and we need to do a better job of consolidating intake so that we have one group of complaints that gets put together, gets farmed out to the right person, whether it's potential imminent danger situation, it's an overgrown lot, it's our standard minimum property maintenance case, and then tracked. So I want to do a better job of tracking cases so that, among other reasons, when a priority case comes in from the mayor, from one of your offices, we know exactly where it is and exactly what needs to be done. So that's going to make our operations more efficient, and that's going to be a priority for next year. A second thing is technology. So we do have a system known as Llama. It's our land use system, and it's been pretty good, but not great is how I would describe it. And we still do have to put in grunt work, filling out forms, intervening manually in the process in a lot of cases, because it doesn't quite fit what it is we want to do operationally. And so we are looking at exactly what we need out of Llama. We do have somebody in safety and permits, happily, who has a lot of knowledge of the system and lets us make changes, but we're not really where we want to be when it comes to our technology. So when it comes to lot abatement, we want to have a better system for invoicing people. We want to automate that. That'll save time. That'll free up our workforce. But those are really the two big areas I think we need to work on. Intake and just tracking of cases, making sure nothing falls through the cracks. And second, the smart use of technology.
Okay, Councilmember Jeruso.
I guess a few things. Number one is, when's the last time code enforcement met with civil service about these requirements?
I've met with civil service frequently, at least a monthly basis, not just the job requirements, but other issues related to moving people within positions, compensation. So on this one in particular, though, the ball is in my court. So I am going to submit a formal request to reduce those requirements. In fact, we reduced them just a few months ago. They were even more onerous than they are now. But my view is they should be reduced further.
I mean, I don't have any problem supporting that. And again, Mr. Mulligan, I'm trying to give you a wide berth because I knew you're very new to this. But there's just certain things that we hear all the time. Civil service is the boogeyman. I can't do things. I'm handcuffed as a result of them. And we find when we talk to civil service, it's nobody's talked to us. If they asked for this, we could do it. These are the ways that we're trying to make it happen. So I would ask that in addition to the code inspector change that you mentioned, that if there's anything else that you want changed, please copy this entire committee on it. And we're happy to stay in touch with Ms. Trapagnier to try and make sure that there aren't any impediments as well. I guess the other thing is, I was here for the ARP first tranche. Code enforcement got a little bit of money. Were 2 people hired to do lot abatement program? Are you aware of that? It's slated for $46,250 to hire 2 dedicated staff to support the lot abatement program.
No, we have struggled to hire people. We have had several offers out, and I think 2 people turned down our offers for researcher, and we do have an important research gap there. We do have an assistant program manager position that we're reviewing for that program. We're reviewing resumes right now.
All right. And then in code enforcement, also a request was made to hire 2 dedicated staff to improve quality of adjudication cases and compliance by property owners at $60,000. Is the issue still the same there?
The issue is still the same. We did hire 1 office worker who supports us on that, but we have a number of vacancies, and it's a challenge. Even when we have positions and have funding to bring people on board. Our office workers make, I think, $27,000 a year.
All right. And OBES requested through Mr. Bowen, $900,000 for new computers, tablets, and vehicles to improve employee and department performance. Were those purchased?
The computers were purchased, the computer equipment was purchased, and I don't think the vehicles were purchased.
All right.
But the computers have been distributed and they've made a difference.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess, let me ask this a little bit unfair, and even I'm trying to find it. Do you know how much the vehicle cost was roughly?
I don't know.
All right. I mean, I just guess my point is, the council has made and will continue to make allocations to try and make the job easier. But I think concomitantly, we want to see some more urgency with this blight. And I mean, in my view, particularly the ones that are habitual, repeat, consistent offenders, it makes it extraordinarily hard to tell somebody, sorry. I mean, it's not a good excuse. It just isn't. And I just think that when you have something that's been going on since Katrina, you have a pool, I think, in Mandeville that has been problematic. When you have the properties on Eagle Street that have been 7 times through the system, we want to give you the tools to be successful, but at the same time, there have been tools that have been given, and we need to make sure that there isn't anything else legally to be changed to impede progress.
Yes, sir. One thing I want to stress is that it really, at the end of the day, comes down to manpower. So working with civil service, it's an important thing to do, but we have probably 100 important things to do along those lines. And I have senior leadership who are working 12, 14 hours a day, 5 days a week. I mean, Winston Reed is out there at night, on the weekends, looking at blighted houses in all 5 districts. My staff, I mean, not everyone, we have problems, just like any organization, but they put in good full days of work. They work hard. And so always there's prioritization happening. And it's just my assessment, coming in from the outside, haven't spent a lifetime in municipal service, started last year. My assessment is the root cause of the challenges we face is manpower, and the budget organization. And so I think anything that can be done to improve those fundamental issues are going to trickle through the organization, trickle through operations, and make a positive difference.
There are 13 inspectors for code enforcement. Is that right?
We currently have 6 inspectors.
But you're budgeted for 13.
Something like that. Yes,
okay.
sir.
I mean, yeah, I guess I think whatever we can do to help you, because I agree with you, you can't do your job if you don't have enough people. So whatever we can do to help you get the personnel that you need. And then I think again, I keep on citing Councilmember Thomas a lot today, but I think he's right about the prioritization triage that needs to happen. And I consistently think it's got to be a function of age and or degree, right? Condition. And sometimes they're both connected. When you look at his apartment complex, you look at the thing on Clouet Street, you look at some of the other things, obviously the condition is bad, but also when you've had something that's 10, 12, 15, 17 years old, I think that's got to be a top priority.
Thank you. And Councilmember Eugene FTE Green.
Mr. Mulligan, in some cities, the cities are aggressive in taking properties back. I think that when you have a property that has had so many years on it, a decade of neglect, for example, that it's challenging if the owner chooses to do nothing. And as I drive through, for example, the Desire area or the Upper Ninth Ward areas or St. Rock, I see so many houses that I know have been vacant for a long period of time. In your experience outside of New Orleans, have you seen aggressive natures on the part of cities relative to taking properties? And would you suggest that we get more into that business?
Well, I'm sorry, Councilmember Green, it's not something I'm familiar with. I've not been working in a role like this before last year. I'll say I am open to any ideas about aggressive new ideas for fighting blight. I do think, and I say this with some confidence, the ultimate solution is getting it into the hands of a responsible owner. So I'll talk a little bit later about Moto Own, and I think that's a program with great potential. Again, off the top of my, I wouldn't even want to speculate about whether that's something we'd want to do. But if it is something that interests you, I can go to my staff and do the research and come up with an assessment for you. I'd be very happy to do that.
And the reason I ask is because I actually absolutely know that the city doesn't want to own a tremendous amount of property. But there does become a point where for 10 years, you've been trying to get an owner to do certain things and he won't do it. You can't sell it unless you own it. You know, and at the end of the day, we tear down the property that's on it and cut the grass for a while, we can eventually find a potential owner for it. So it's something that I'd like you to look into. I know that in certain areas or certain cities, they're aggressive in that respect. And I don't want to see the city have a ton of inventory. But then on the other hand, I don't want them to go up and down our streets, our citizens to go up and down our streets and not want to invest, which costs the city money in the long run because of the fact that there's a blighted property that's been on Desire Street for 10 years. Talk to me about intake and what we can do on intake. You said that that's a big concern. And of course, I appreciate the fact that my liaison to your office is able to send emails and we've been able to get some progress. But is it something on our end relative to intake, or is it just more personnel to be able to have a different intake process?
I think it's primarily personnel. We may come back with a budget ask for, say, for some software, for an additional person, say, to do intake. But it really is a matter of looking internally about how we're getting all these complaints. So just for example, are we ensuring that every grass complaint that comes into our front desk, telephone call, email, walk-in, is getting to our grass cutting coordinator? I know there have been cases where that's not been the case because somebody will follow up and it just something has fallen through the cracks. And so we got to really tighten that up. And that is again, this is an issue of so much coming in, just this a deluge of complaints that and a scarcity of people to contend with them, that sort of thing it will happen with more frequency. So if we can beef up the personnel and then really look at the process and getting as few intake points as possible. One thing I've done, for example, is have all council complaints go to Devin in our office, who's been doing a good job. He can then do some of this triage, some of this prioritization, and get it right to the correct people, whether it's title research, because it's got to get pushed through there, the lawyers for sheriff's sale, grass cutting. That's been one change we've made. But I really think this is internal, looking at the process and tweaking it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I appreciate you looking into that because it may come down to the point where one day we have a significant ownership of certain properties by the city and we have a process to make them available. One of the concerns and one of the challenges is, of course, if you look at the 50 properties that we showed today, the problem with that market is that somebody has to buy that property and then tear it down. They spend $15,000 tearing it down, et cetera, et cetera. And it's many times more than that, and they have to go through the code process. It may be that the city has to do some of that, take down more properties, own the lots, such as on Frenchman Street, where I know one of the frustrations that I see, and I don't necessarily have the answer to get to the bottom of it yet, except for ownership, is that sometimes you tear a property down and the owner still doesn't cut the grass, even though the property has been removed. They have a lien on the property. That's a big concern. Mm-hmm. So what you have is a regrowth of the vegetation, even though the property is gone. The only real solution to that is the city to budget maintenance of some of those lots, and keep in mind that the reason for that is that in the long run, it works to our advantage as a city. It'll be better to have vacant lots that are cut than to have these rundown houses. I know that there are a lot of persons who suggest that the city ought to find a way for some of these properties to be developed. But if you look at those 50 properties, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars to get those properties back into commerce sometimes. And at the end of the day, that's not necessarily the business that we're in ourselves. But thank you again for your work. I appreciate you looking into that. I'm kind of familiar with some cities who have departments that, for example, we have a NORA here, and maybe the NORA is the vehicle to take a lot back after we torn down a property. I know they don't want to maintain them, but they don't want to be in the business of maintaining them. But our city is going to improve in the future. We are going to have some population growth. It would be a good idea to continually consider having an inventory of well-maintained lots that we can make available on the market.
Yes, sir. And one thing I'll mention, we do work with Nora. So for example, 2119 Washington Avenue, Council Member Harris's district, we reached out to Nora about the potential acquisition of that property, if that were to be how it would be finally disposed of. Now that's wrapped up in litigation, so we'll see what happens, but Nora has been a good partner to us. I'll also say we've had cases where we worked with Parks Department about maybe turning something into a park.
Right.
So I think when a property gets to the point where we've tried everything, it's just not working, it's been a long time, that's when we all have to sit down and say, look, this has to be treated in a new way. What's the best way for the community to make use of this property in the future?
And I'm ready to be involved with the discussion of that happening earlier than later. I know that we have private property rights, but I emphasize what I said previously. Those private property rights also extend to people who live near those properties, whose children have to walk by them. Roger Williams Drive, if you're going to let the vegetation grow up to the point where you can't even see the house, then you have no interest in it whatsoever. If the city takes that property, tears it down and holds on to that lot in certain areas like the DeSay area and other areas, eventually the city will have a market for some of those properties. But the reason that you don't have a big market in areas like Desire, Florida, even though some new houses are under construction, is because people drive by it quietly and look at it and say, if there are 400 vacant lots in this area and properties, I just don't want to be here. And unless we do something about that, we won't have the kind of investment that we need to see. We need to treat every neighborhood as a neighborhood where we want a young couple to move in or a single person to move in, start raising a family or exercising their career in that area. And there are some areas of this city that it would be hard to imagine a young person deciding this is where I want to start. But when we get to that point, we'll see an enhanced city.
Councilmember Thomas.
Madam Chair, before I begin to review the calendar ordinances and what we're doing with section 66-282, maybe it's time for us to call together a joint meeting with our New Orleans delegation. Much of what stands in our way is state law in a lot of areas, our ability to control revenue that comes through the city and the rights of the property owner. So before the next session, that's not a fiscal section. Hopefully you and our budget chair can call a meeting with our delegation on what kind of bills give us the best chance to change state law, especially surrounding property and property rights. Ordinance calendar number 857 was submitted for first reading on the 1st. It's reference to section 66-282, litter dumping and dumping of specific materials. It's going to increase the penalties for the folk here who are listening. First offense from $200 to $500. It's going to increase the penalties for littering from the second offense from $300 to $500. Councilmember Green is also looking at adding an amendment to deal with vehicle impoundment. If you're using your vehicle to dump or trash our city, then the city's ability to seize that vehicle, we ought to have the right to do that too. There's some other things that we're going to be dealing with, and when we get to the motor-owned thing, at some point, I have some other comments on what we intend to do there. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we take public comment, I do want you to comment on some properties in my area which have historic significance on the 38-page building list that I gave you. I mean, there are houses that have beautiful architectural details that certainly we do not want to demolish or cannot demolish under HGLC rules. So what powers do you have to get those adjudicated back on the market, back to somebody who would like to renovate these properties?
Well, the primary power is through sheriff sales. So I certainly agree with you. Demolition really should always be the last option unless it really poses this acute danger, but especially so when you have a beautiful historical house. And we do work with HDLC, we work with VCC on these sorts of properties. And that's one of the reasons I've am a strong supporter of OBES as an organization. And I think we've had a lot of success working together because many of these properties cross departmental lines. There may be a code enforcement problem. There may be a historic preservation issue, safety and permits issue. And so we've had a lot of benefits to working together collaboratively in that way. But ultimately, something like that, really, there are two things. So first off, we're going to levy fines, and sometimes that can be an impetus for a private sale. And that's when maybe the neighborhood, maybe a neighbor can reach out to the owner and take control of that property through just a regular sale and repair it, bring it back into commerce. Primarily, though, we use sheriff's sale. So we'll have fines, we'll foreclose on the property, and we'll sell it at auction. As I say, it's not a silver bullet, and sometimes that doesn't get into the hands of a good owner. But generally speaking, that's the best way to have someone responsible take possession and then fix the blight.
And the last question I'll ask you again before taking public comment is about graffiti. And I'm not talking about beautiful painted graffiti that is situated properly. I'm talking about St. Charles Avenue that has graffiti up and down the street on the trolley stop that's now abandoned. Graffiti that's in Central City that plagues downtown. Tell me what you can do, what your department can do about graffiti.
Well, graffiti is a violation of the minimum property maintenance code, so it can be treated as any other violation of the code, caved in building, broken windows, and we can bring the entity, the owner to hearing and address it that way. One thing I would like to do, and I have requested this in next year's budget, is put together a small in-house team, so-called strike team, to be able to deal immediately with issues as they arise. This could include, for example, cutting grass on city property. This is something that was mentioned, and when we get that, we don't have the authority to cut it within code enforcement, but I try to track down the owners. Maybe they have the capacity, maybe they don't. And I'd like to be able to just send the team out, 2 people, a lawnmower, a couple weed whackers, a truck, and just get it done. Similarly, I want to have the ability to board up buildings in-house. We can just go do it. Again, not a silver bullet. People can find their way in, even boarded up buildings, but it'll help. And similarly, maybe we can give them the tools to address graffiti in that way.
Great. All right. Now, unless there's any other comments, go ahead to take public comment. Corey from Lost Now Found Ministries. And just a reminder, everybody, 1 comment, 2 minutes per person. Thank you.
Well, greetings.
Hello.
Let's talk about our new inventive way. A new inventive way. Look at what we hear today, all these body properties. Now, do you know that I called Mr. Tommy to get the adjudicated properties from the city? And with those adjudicated properties, a new way is that we seek to get every church in a mile of any adjudicated property from the city to actually get that property and get that property into compliance. And they can also help the parishioners to get some, equity and some type of, place here in New Orleans that some of y'all people can't, excuse me, not y'all, because y'all just got here. Hopefully y'all keep on doing good work. But centuries have not done for the people yet to get them houses. And Mr. Oliver Thomas, I appreciate you don't get on your phone right while I'm talking to you, my brother. I don't talk to you often. I appreciate it though. You're my big brother. I respect you like that, but you don't respect me right now. So again, that's why I'm in right now with everybody who I touch, you know what I'm saying? Because they don't show no respect to anybody. You know what I'm saying? I love you, man. I clean your dirty drawers if I have to. But you want to show
Looking
some
up some of
respect.
those state laws.
Anyway, so let me say again, these body properties need to be done to the people of the city to get these body properties. Okay, so there's a law and a code right here that will give the culture ministry, LERS 47-2205, give you right for y'all commission to give every church in any block of property the right to go in that property and have that property and fix stuff for their parishioner to go ahead on it and rent, and they can gain the rent themselves. It's time for a new way to get this thing done for our people. And all way we get it done is through our people who put their blood and sweat equity into service. I was talking to somebody upstairs who worked for this guy to say, I'm looking for a house. I need a house. I said, you've been working here, you don't have a house? Something must be wrong with y'all and everybody around here. So again, time for a new way. If y'all not gonna do it the way, I guarantee I asked Almighty God to send a lightning bolt to burn this sucker down, get it done right way. It's time, man. Cost Ministry gonna get this done. Everybody will get a house around here that need to get a house, because again, everybody deserves the right here in New Orleans. These people come here, gentrification, take out property and everything, and y'all just sit around and do nothing? Come on, man. I'm tired of all y'all, really. Really. I'm ready to leave out here and leave New Orleans by its daggone self.
Maxwell?
Thank you, council members. Maxwell Chartilo, Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center. I'm going to comment on the proposed ordinance and really appreciate the work that went into this. And Councilmember Girousso, I know we talked about this earlier. I had a chance to finally review, so I can give you a little more comments. And first off, I want to say speeding up the timeline to get to daily fines is excellent. Very excited about that. Hannah Adams, who can't be here, but is with Southeast Louisiana Legal Services, I know thanks you for closing what I'm going to call the Josh Bruno loophole to make sure that we can penalize multiple units in the same property. Although I think there may still be a tiny loophole in there, and I would love to just look at the language with you on that to make sure we get it right. I still have a little heartburn about expanding property owner to include occupant or leasee. And I'm worried that puts code enforcement in charge of determining who to fine. And that is especially concerning to me, given the power differential between landlords and tenants. So as an example, I've seen landlords who use the yards of their dilapidated properties as dumping grounds, and that yard in the lease may technically be the responsibility of the tenant, but the tenant has no power to say, landlord, don't dump that mattress in the yard. And I'm worried about that, about what that looks like, and also worried about just practically, if you take that through the code enforcement process, how do you enforce that against a tenant? With enforcing it against a landlord, you could put a lien on their property. You can't do that with the tenant. Similarly, a tenant would have representation. I would say owners are ultimately responsible, and they have remedies to deal with tenants who aren't taking care of their property, right? Our state landlord tenant law is actually very favorable to landlords. And in those scenarios, tenants have representation to deal with that in a court, right? But they don't necessarily have representation to deal with that in an adjudication around code enforcement. So I think I have a lot of concerns about that piece. But I would be happy to work with you on it. And I would highly recommend that you invite Hannah into that conversation, just because I think her experience there working with tenants would be so valuable.
I'm absolutely happy to do that. And I think Maxwell, the piece we're concerned about is, for example, the Dollar General store, where, right. I mean, that's what we're really thinking about is we have one, right, exactly, it's a commercially owned property. We go to and the same thing for us too is the shopping center at the River Bend, where a national chain drugstore is. I mean, I don't think it's their fault, but what we get is, they're generating trash primarily, sometimes rat harborage, which seems to be because of the tenant, not because of the owner. And then they point the finger at each other and nothing happens. So I'd love to work with you and Hannah on how we can get that in the right space, and make sure we all are on the same page.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maxwell.
Excuse me, I'd like to respond to that too, though, but I think that we also do have to be realistic. I mean, there are some tenants who get into leases, for example, and know that a landlord can't evict them within the term of the lease, and they choose to use their yards for working on automobiles, for example, or parking on the grass, and they don't follow sometimes the terms of their lease. So I think that we do need to be realistic about it and recognize that on a case-by-case basis, things do change. But it's important to recognize that whoever is in the property, if they're allowing garbage and trash to be on the front of their property, if they're working on their vehicles in their front yards, if they're not doing the things that they have to do, then they should be held accountable. And that's what we need to do as a city to address some of the code violations that we have. Handle it on a case-by-case basis, no bias relative to any particular party, but with a realism in place that there are sometimes bad tenants, there are sometimes bad owners, lots of times bad owners, but we need to address the issues wherever they are.
Thank you. Chris Lawrence.
Good afternoon, Council members, Alva Thomas, Eugene Green, Mr. Joe Jeruso, and Leslie Harris, Freddie King. I'm President Against the Forces of All Evil, a nonprofit organization to solve problems in the city of New Orleans. Blight, Katrina, 17 years ago. I be in them houses. I witness what's going on. Just like underneath the overpass, homeless women getting raped. Prostitution goes on in all these houses. Drug addicts shoot heroin, fentanyl in the 7th Ward, Mr. Green, your territory.
Absolutely.
The West Bank, your territory, Mr. King. Why these homeowners and these business owners think they could have property that's been around since Katrina and not doing nothing about it? Jason Williams has the authority and the Attorney General of Louisiana to take this property from these people. You can get a court order within 30 days. If they don't do nothing, it's the city's property. This man said burn it. No, I'm not about violence. Make a statement like that will have him in jail. I work with the FBI. I work with the New Orleans Police Department. This is a problem, blight. The citizens cry out to me, blight, blight. If they can't maintain their property like they maintain their own property and their children, take it away on court orders and let them fight all they want. The federal government will, housing department will back y'all. This is a problem, okay? Ain't nobody want a fire start a house. It's going to be a danger to the next neighbors and the residents. And the fire department tired of putting out fires because a drug addict shot dope. A woman got raped. Somebody decides to burn the property. Okay, burn Jeffrey Epstein's house. They already burned it. Okay, rape go on in these properties. Drugs go on. I see it. I work with the police. I'm a CI for the police. I'm getting all the drugs off the streets in New Orleans, the United States. God is good. Jesus is great. God don't play games.
Thank you, sir. Connie Udo.
Thank you. So before I tap on this issue, I just wanted to thank all of you. I'm the mother of Stephanie Udo, one of the women that was here last week on the carjacking victims. So I wasn't able, I was out of town when she came, otherwise I wouldn't be here, but I just want to thank you all so much. I watched it online for loving and supporting these three women. I was with Stephanie last night for dinner and she said, Mom, that meeting we had with City Council gave us the closure we had been looking for through the DA's office, through that sentencing when the mayor showed up. Thank you for giving them that closure. So I just wanted to take a minute to just thank y'all so much for me as a parent for doing that. So now on to the next issue. Several things. So Mr. Mulligan, we've been dealing with 5700 Vicksburg. That's the Katrina blighted house. I literally met with Winston Reed before we came. What is so frustrating and what needs to somehow, the constraints that we just keep hearing from code enforcement. Winston, why can't you go in this house and inspect for the mold? We heard from a guy boarding up the house. He thought there was a fire because the black mold was so prevalent. So again, frustrating. Winston could not go in that house today to address it. That's the path to get it condemned, to get it turned down. Now what? So he's frustrated. Your inspectors are frustrated because they're constrained. Another thing, Councilmember Thomas and Green, I agree. We need to look at other cities that have aggressive blight. We would not be here today if we had timelines such as you get to have a blighted property for 1 year.
If you could
And
wrap up.
if it's
Sorry,
not,
ma'am.
then it's gone. It's ours. It goes, you should have a timeline on amount of sheriff sales. Francis Massachusetts had 3 sheriff sales on the books. And, why should it go that she gets to do that again? And just show up at the midnight hour and take her and pay it? She has money and pay it and get her property back. So I think you all need to look at, I'm all about more fines, but again, where's code enforcement on the daily fines? Francis Massachusetts knows how to work the system. She goes to her hearing the day before.
Ms. Udo, I
she
need
cuts
you
her
to wrap it
grass.
up.
She cut her grass 4 months. We've gone all summer not cutting her grass. Where are the daily fines? So I don't think code enforcement, I think it's broken. It doesn't do its job. Where are these daily fines? Joe, you talk about increasing. Why increase if you can't even get the $500 a day fine? You know what I mean?
Yep.
So those are points that I want to see more aggressive state legislation if needed change.
Mr.
Again, the
DeRusso.
system protects the violator and not the good citizens.
Thank you, Ms. Shuda.
Yeah, I was going to say, Connie, is I think the issue is the daily fines may be set. They don't set a daily fines hearing for 180 days. So they're not necessarily accruing every single day. What I
Yeah.
want to have happen is daily fine gets set at the hearing. Then the daily fines hearing is set 60 days later. Daily fine accrues from the date of the hearing for another 60 days. Then you come there, then you get assessed A, the initial fine, B, any remediation. And then if you're 60 days times $500, I mean, that's 30 grand, right? I mean, that's
Right.
real money. So
Yeah.
it's beyond time to be able, particularly for people who have cheated the system, to make sure we bear down.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Bridget Starr?
Good afternoon. My name is Bridget Starr. I have lived next door to blight for 15 years. The homeowner received $149,000 in road home money and refuses to fix or sell her property. I've taken time from work, family to send emails, request inspections, attend hearings, and speak at city council meetings off and on for 13 years. My dad and I have written over 100 emails and contacted upwards of 40 city officials, code enforcement workers, lawyers, civic leaders, and news reporters regarding 5700 Vicksburg Street. We've been to well over a dozen hearings since 2009 for this property, which has received over 30 violations, including being a swimming pool hazard. The homeowner refuses to pay hearing fines, which has led to 3 attempted sheriff sales. 1, in 2013, she paid all $17,000 in fines and fines less than in taxes and fines and less than an hour before the sale. Because she paid the fines, she didn't have to actually fix the pool. So we had to start the process over again. 2, in 2018, the fines were stopped altogether because Judge Bruno because she evaded all attempted services, she said that she was not served properly, and Judge Bruno actually sided with her. So not only did she not have to pay the fines, we again had to start the inspection process all over. 3, last month, 5700 Vicksburg was planned to go to sheriff's sale a 3rd time. She again paid $10,000 in fines the day of the sale, and here we are, back at square one. I am well versed in the code enforcement process, and I am here today to tell you that it is broken. Habitual violators like Francis Musacchia are easily cheating the system by excessively prolonging payment of fines. And code enforcement is helping them by collecting fines, but never holding them accountable to actually fix the property. In 17 years, her total fines are $27,000. That's only $1,500 a year. The property looks worse than ever. And to top it off, we have become the nuisance to code enforcement. In 2018, our efforts to keep our children safe changed the law, forcing blighted pools to be filled. Despite the law, the mayor let Francis cover the pool with a wooden deck. The pool is a breeding ground for rodents, and the wood is now rotting. Yet code enforcement leaders remind me The homeowner has rights. What about our rights? What about our quality of life? This long and drawn out cyclical process of inspections, hearings, and then fines, and now 3 sheriff's sale attempts has been an emotionally exhausting and defeating one. Heftier fines are not going to solve this problem. Fix the process and end blight. Mr. Green, I just want to say I have 3 children. They know nothing but this property and the problems we have. Little children, that's all they know. They're growing up next to this. Thank you all for your time, for giving this so much attention. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Starr. Gloria DeQueer.
Hi, good afternoon. I just want to give honor to what honor is due to Mr. DeRusso, Ms. Harris, Mr. King, Mr. Green, Mr. Thomas.
Can you pull the microphone closer?
Yes.
Pull the microphone closer so we can hear you.
Okay,
Thank
all right. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, I'm somewhat new to this. I came here for a Gentilly Fest proclamation, so I kind of have some sense of the spirit around here. I just want to quickly, since I think I have 2 minutes and I didn't write notes, I didn't know I was going to be able to speak. And I did submit a comment to Mr. DeRusso's website, and I did submit a request to Mr. Green's through his Facebook page, which wasn't a very good way of doing it, but I was just desperate. My whole purpose in being here, Mr. Mulligan, you're the person I really would like to speak with after this meeting because it's very extensive what I have to say. But just briefly to let you know what happened. Unfortunately, I have a terribly blighted property. I thought Mr. Green was going to put it on the screen. I was going to put my head down had he done that. It's very terrible. But I did receive a hearing, and I'm out of town anywhere from 3 to 5 months dealing with some family issues in Hackensack, New Jersey. And I returned back in late spring, and then early summer, midsummer, I received a hearing notification. I couldn't make it because I had 2 doctor's appointments, so I emailed code enforcement, request to change the schedule, and I was told there's no such thing, that I either had to have a proxy or someone to represent me. And I thought that was really unfair because I was trying to be responsible. And the property that I'm referring to is co-owned by someone else. Actually, I believe is still employed with the city of New Orleans, which is ironic. So my problem today, and I used to be a neighborhood association president and vice president as well, and on different boards. So I'm quite familiar. But anyhow, I just wanted to say that I hope somehow when you change some of the rules and regulations, people like me who wasn't given an opportunity for, I was given an opportunity for a hearing, and I did email requesting a reschedule. No one contacted me. I've called and gone in person, and I just want to explain the unique situation about the blight, and that's why I'm here. I just want the opportunity, Mr. Mulligan, and I do support everything that you're trying to do to make the city better.
Thank you, Ms. DeQueer. I'm sure Mr. Mulligan will stay after to speak with you.
Thank you so much.
Councilmember Green. You're done?
No, that was from previous.
Okay, Councilmember DeRusso.
I guess I would just like to know, Mr. Mulligan, we changed the pool rules. Let's assume for argument's sake that we passed the ordinance on October 6th. And then the mayor has 10 days to sign thereafter or do whatever she does. Let's assume it's all buttoned up by October 15th. Can you give me a timeline on filling that pool after that? Now, if the pool is unfiltered and not clean as it's supposed to be, I'd just like to know, given that it's been 17 years, will the city fill it within the next couple of weeks?
Sure. So I can't give you an exact timeline right now because I need to know a little more information. For example, if we have an occupied structure,
It's not.
it's unoccupied. Well, as long as we've done the required inspections then, which I'd be happy to make sure are done immediately, we can take care of it. We have the money. As long as it's unoccupied, there shouldn't be any issue and there's no litigation. I'd have to check with the lawyers on that. I don't see a problem and I could certainly get you that date.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
I
sir.
think it'd be good to let the residents know so they can start seeing some action there.
Sure.
Thank you.
Councilmember Thomas.
No, I'm good.
Okay. Any online comment?
Yes, we have one online. Well, we have 2, but Ms. DeQueer has presented already. So we have one online comment.
Yes.
from
Still a comment.
Mr. Burnside. Mr. Burnside says, Michael Burnside says, I would like to briefly bring to your attention the blighted property and nuisance at 2321 St. Andrew. In this past Saturday's newspaper, this property was listed under the real estate transfers. A foreclosure commissioner had deeded the property over to the Secretary of HUD in exchange for roughly $106,000. 2321 St. Andrew is a crack house and a heroin den. At minimum, one person has died in this house due to an overdose. Both the back and front doors are wide open. The grass and vegetation are jungle-like. There are well over a dozen used abandoned tires on the property. It has been like this for years. There is both new construction and renovations on the 2300 block of St. Andrew. New Hope Baptist Church is building their new community center on a tract of property that includes 2339 St. Andrew. A new person to our neighborhood has completely renovated 2304 St. Andrew. 2308 to 2310 has had its outside completely redone. This block is struggling to improve itself, but 2321 is a drag on the whole block. The basic problem is legal. An old man died with a mortgage. His heirs had no incentive to open succession. The bank pretends its mortgage is not ownership. No person, biological or juridical, has any incentive to do anything to help solve this communal problem. Legal resolution is very slow. In this operational legal vacuum, the tiny predators enjoy a little too much freedom. The city can't even go on the property to pick up abandoned tires without a huge, lengthy legal process, but your random heroin user can walk onto the property to die of a drug overdose, and there are no legal repercussions for anybody. Ownership should include control of one's property. Absent control should be legal abandonment. The city should seize and sell any structures in which, one, a drug overdose that has happened resulting in death, and two, no person is charged with aiding and facilitating that death. Either people are responsible for what goes on their properties or they are not. If not, then ownership without responsibility will break this legal system. Only good guys are currently stopped by the law. We need help. The law needs to be changed. 2321 St. Andrew needs to be brought out of the drug business and back into being a constructive part of this neighborhood.
All right, Councilmember Green.
If an emergency were declared, could you use part-time employees to do inspections, or do they need to be full-time?
We could certainly use part-time employees as inspectors as long as they were properly qualified. I don't see any issues with that, sir.
Right, because the issue with inspectors, for example, is that you need to be able to have somebody who defends in court what they've seen and they filled out the documents correctly and all. And I know that this is a challenging time, the Great Resignation, but I would say that based on what you saw today, that's 50 properties amongst maybe 5,000, to be very honest with you, by the time it's finished. I would say that this comes close to being an emergency, especially what you just heard. Yes, that does happen. People die in vacant houses and the like. So there's a lot that we can do, but I'd like to look into that and discuss it with the council, the possibility of part-time inspectors, even on an emergency basis for a while, to be able to get to all of those properties that we haven't been able to get to and to follow up with those hearings. So I look forward to talking to you about that further, and let us know how we can potentially help in that regard. Maybe when you have your conversations with civil service, also discuss the possibilities of having part-time employees, because I know that there are a lot of people who aren't working full-time jobs for whatever, and they want to be doing work remotely. But I think that maybe the solution is to come to grips with what we have going on even throughout the nation, and maybe have some potential part-time employees to get it done. Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Green. I will just comment on Mr. Burnside's comment. I do think we need to include bank-owned properties in ordinances and have some teeth to make sure that bank-owned properties are properly maintained by the bank. With that, let's go ahead and move on to the Moto Own. And I think a couple council members need to roll out.
Yeah, there's a criminal justice press conference there, but for 3. But of course, I have some Moto Own ordinance, so I'd like him to start there, and hopefully I'll have a chance to comment.
Okay, do you want to roll through Moda own?
Yes, of course.
I could be making my comments while we do that. I know in your presentation, you're going to talk about the applications, but only 4% have been approved.
That's right.
How do we tighten up the language or the process so that, especially given the need, that more than 4% of 108 applications? And then the other thing is the term adjacent. Have we clearly defined what adjacent is? Is it next to? Is it behind? Is it around? Is it next to what's next to? I think we got to clear that up. I think that would also help. And then the other thing that I think we need to do is that make sure that the department has what it, and I think we've already talked about that, has what it needs so that we can not only help you clear up those definitions from a public policy or an ordinance position, but that as Councilmember Green and Harris said, that you have the manpower to do what you need to do to get this done. But the motor own piece, I think, is a solution. I know when the lower ninth ward law that Senator Bishop tried to pass, where if you were from that community, you could prove that you'd lived in that community, had property adjacent. It passed in Orleans Parish, but it lost with the rest of the state. I think we need to begin to revisit that kind of stuff.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Councilmember Thomas. I'll run through this slideshow quickly, but essentially you've hit the nail on the head. This is a good program. It's got the right conceptual foundation, which is someone cares about a property, they're invested in it, they're nearby, and we want to get it into their hands because they'll be responsible. So as you mentioned, well, it's a new program, so it's really been operational for about a year and a half. And it focuses on vacant lots, but not any vacant lots. So in order to be eligible for this program, it's got to be a vacant, empty lot adjudicated to the city for at least 5 years, and then already offered up to the public through tax sale. So if that's the case, then that's a lot which potentially could be acquired through Moda own.
Right, and before I leave to go to the criminal justice press conference, know that I'm going to be submitting some amendments to deal with all of those issues that we're highlighting to make sure that this program is a success.
Great.
So thank you.
No, I'm pleased to hear that, sir. And to follow on your comment about what constitutes adjacent, well, currently adjacent means you have to be on the same street frontage and to the right or the left. And in order to acquire a home, you also have to reside at that property, which is adjacent. You have to maintain that vacant lot for at least 1 year. And then you have to pay the land value plus closing costs for the lot. Now, to date, we've had 108 applications for the program. 4% have been approved. 8% are in process, so it's an eligible position, excuse me, an eligible lot, but maybe we're waiting on the deposit or documentation. But the vast majority of applications, 88%, have been denied. And I've put the reasons why down on the slides. Generally, most frequently, the reason is the lot has been adjudicated, but hasn't been offered up for tax sale yet. So it's not yet ripe. It could be that it's already been sold, or it doesn't meet that criteria of adjacentness that's needed under the current rules. And so I think the way to look at this program is we've had a pilot. The pilot has really given us guidance on where we need to take it, the changes we have to make. And so now it's time to do that, to make those changes. Next slide, please. So really 3 problems with the Moda own program, which we need to fix. So first off, it's just too expensive. The incentives aren't lined up correctly for people who are interested in purchasing the properties. Currently, you're really better off just buying it at sheriff's sale, or excuse me, buying it through tax sale. And so the change we think we need to make is have that total cost simply be the costs which you've put in to maintain that lot, to mow it, do whatever else is necessary to keep it in compliance with the law. and then the closing costs. We think that's fair and is going to make the prospect of acquiring one of these blighted lots much more attractive to the owner nearby. Second, the issue that Councilmember Thomas mentioned, there just aren't enough properties currently eligible. So we want to change the definition of adjacent. If a lot is behind you, that should count. If you're on the corner, and so it's not the exact same frontage, that should be okay, and that should count, so that'll help. Two, if you own a property, but you don't have the homestead exemption, but nevertheless, you are caring for the lot next door and doing what is required to keep that lot into compliance, we think you should be eligible to purchase it through Moda Own. And then we'd like to be able to offer these lots, and we have the ability to offer these lots up to eligible buyers through Moda Own before they go to tax sale. So in other words, we have the adjudication, the property is ripe, and we want to go to the owners nearby who are qualified and say, look, if you are interested, here's a pathway for you to acquire this blighted lot. So we think that's really going to open up the number of properties available for the program. And it is a bit complicated. Part of this is messaging, just the way we describe and qualify properties as adjacent, but there's also this issue about shared ownership. So it's just too complicated if there's a vacant lot and 2 or 3 people maybe want to acquire it. So we want to make that first come, first serve. If you come, you put down your deposit for the vacant lot that is adjacent and you care for it properly, then you have the right to acquire it. And 6, absolutely essential, is administrative support to the program. So we currently have no one working full-time. Our senior lawyer, Latifah Harris, is doing this as a collateral duty. She's the hardest working person in code enforcement, myself included. So to make this program run correctly, if we make those changes, which is going to increase the interest in the program, is 1.5 FTEs. That's a manager and then part-time office support. So I've also requested that in next year's budget. I'll move on then to our Chapter 66 lot abatement program. So this is essentially, but not entirely, cutting grass. This is dealing with vacant lots. It's a specialized program that's outside of our emergency abatement program and also our main minimum property maintenance program, which we've mostly been discussing today. Process is pretty straightforward. We get a complaint about an overgrown lot. Generally, that's grass which is over 10 inches tall. We do an inspection to verify that it's out of compliance. We notice the owner. We give the owner 10 days to fix the problem, to cut the grass. After 10 days, we re-inspect. If it's still out of compliance, we immediately pass it to one of our 2 contractors, and then they cut it and have a monthly maintenance cut. Currently takes about 6 weeks from that initial report to us to getting the lot cut by the contractor. And we have 3.5 FTEs working on this program right now. Performance to date this year, we've cut about 2,000 lots to this point. Last year, throughout the entirety of 2021, we cut about 1,500 lots. So our projection is we're going to more than double the amount of lots cut last year. I think, in fact, that understates how the program is performing currently. One reason is there was very little activity in the first quarter of 2022, only 210 lots in total. Second, we're going to get a couple big achievements this month, September, about 60 lots in the lower 9th in preparation for mayoral event, about 40 lots we picked up in Holly Grove. We drove around with our imminent danger team to identify properties there, and then did a ride along with Councilmember Green, so 50 lots. So that's about 150 in addition to our kind of typical intake process. So what's been critical, I think, to the program's improved performance this year, and it's going to be critical moving forward, is one, most important, designating somebody to run the program. So this is D'Artagnan Stovall, one of our classified employees. And in April, when I arrived in code enforcement, I told him, and he wanted the job, look, you're in charge of this program. You're going to tell us what you need to make it run well. You're not going to be held to account for the process you use, but you will be held to account for the results which you've either deliver or fail to deliver. And I'm happy to say he's done a great job with the program. And part of that is really encouraging him and encouraging everyone to maintain focus on our operations. We have a process we have to abide by under the law, and so that's what we do. And we ensure that technology, policy, best practices, all of that serves that goal. And we don't try to fit the program into process where it doesn't work. And I think that's been a challenge that the program has had in the past. Too complicated, too much policy interference, when at the end of the day, as I've said, it's pretty simple. There's overgrown lots, people tell them about us, and we cut the grass. So I think that's been absolutely key to the success of the program to this point. There are areas for improvement, which I'll talk about shortly, but at the end of the day, it really is most of all that sense of ownership with which Mr. Stovall has in saying, look, the buck, or really I'm going to be responsible for pushing this program forward, making sure I ask for what's necessary and getting the job done. So in terms of looking forward, 3 areas where we have to improve. So first, of course, is resources. What we need to make this program run at good efficiency, especially now that we're getting through more lots, more complaints, is 7 FTEs. So we've got 1 inspector now, we've got a half-time office worker, we've got DART, we've got 1 researcher, and we essentially want to double our staff. We think that's what's going to be necessary to get the complaints processed a little more quickly, to ensure nothing falls through the cracks and just keep the machinery working well. Second is cost recovery. So we are preparing to send out invoices to lots that have been cut, but a lot of people, historically, this has been the case, simply aren't going to pay. They're not going to respond to those invoices. So what the law requires us to do currently is have the tax collector send a letter, a follow-up invoice essentially, and then put the charges on the tax bill if they don't pay, like with other code enforcement activities. But something we've been talking to finance about is a potential legislative change to lower the priority of those bills. Now, I don't fully, don't have really the information necessary to speak in detail with this, about this, but I will say I'm fully in support of whatever changes need to be made to get that money coming into the city. So if it doesn't come into 5110, the code enforcement budget, that's fine. I don't care, as long as the process is working so that the people who don't pay their invoices, we have some remedy against that and we can ultimately collect. And then finally, what I did touch on a bit earlier are some internal operations process changes. I mentioned intake and case tracking. There may be a technology component there, but it's mostly just getting the personnel established, getting staffed up, and then looking at how we're doing things and making changes appropriately. So that one we'll be looking at. That's going to be a priority for next year. And second is the appropriate integration of technology. We have integrated llama into the program, but an important step we've taken is not forcing the grass cutting program to comply with everything llama can do and try to make it fit llama. Rather, DART has said, we're going to make llama fit what I think the best way is to run this program. So it's not fully automated, let's say, but it is getting the job done. And the question now is, how do we increase automation? How do we increase the use of tech in a way that's not distracting, but does increase efficiency? And the main area for that is billing. So that's really the main step we're looking at with the program now is billing, and this is going to be part of it. To this point, mostly but not entirely, the program works off complaints, although as I have mentioned, we've gone out proactively in Holly Grove, really in all the districts, and have looked at areas, surveyed areas, Hoffman Triangle, and have picked up large swaths of blighted properties. And we want to do that more. With one inspector, it's tough. I have pushed some inspectors off MPM duty to help with that, but really that comes down to the number of people we have that allow us to be more aggressive, more proactive. And then I spoke about the internal strike team, just having a little team in-house. It's not going to solve the problem by any means, but it will allow us to immediately move against priority issues when it comes to lot abatement. So very happy to entertain any questions that you have.
I guess I'll start. Certainly, if we can get some lots prioritized in District B through a ride along, let's schedule that so we can ride together and look at some overgrown lots that we pass every day. And I know that Matt from my office has flagged for you all, including on Hoffman Triangle. But I do want to ask several things. Since the Moto Own program started, how many properties have been actually acquired through this process? Was that on your slide?
It's maybe it's not clear on the slide. So none to this point. So
None.
there are 4 properties which are in that year-long process of maintenance. So these people have put down their deposits, they're eligible for the property, and they're doing the work, and we're monitoring them. We expect if everything, they do what they're supposed to close on those properties in 2023.
Okay. And how often are eligible properties added to the list for Moto Own?
I don't know offhand, Councilmember Harris, but I can get you that answer.
Great. And the biggest challenges with Moto Own?
Well, the biggest challenges with Moto Own, I think, are really the results. 2 things: the results of the pilot. It's too expensive. We got to make it cheaper. We got to open up who is eligible, bring more properties into the program, and reduce some of the complications. And second is going to be personnel. Personnel isn't as acute because of those constraints, which I've just mentioned. But once we make those changes, which we're really prepared to do almost immediately, then we expect much more interest, and we'll need the staff to support that.
Okay. I want to turn to the overgrown lots. Again, I'm happy to do, or my office is happy to do a ride along with anybody to try to identify those lots that are city owned or owned by other people that are overgrown, because we have quite a few in District B. But for clarity, so you're saying that code enforcement does bill property owners for the cost of the lot being cut. Is that correct?
Yes, generally that's the case. We haven't sent out the invoices for 2022 yet, but I spoke with our manager yesterday, in fact, about this, and that's in the works. So we'll get that done this year. The issue is, well, what if they don't pay? And that's going to possibly require some legislative change.
And I'm happy to work with anyone on that legislative change, because we can't have these overgrown properties really blighting various areas of New Orleans. In 2021, I assume that you sent out some bills for grass cutting of private lawns.
Well, I wasn't in charge of the program there, so I can't speak specifically, although I have been told that they were invoiced for last year's work.
Do you know if any money was recouped from the owners?
I don't know offhand. I'll find out.
Okay, thank you. My office also receives complaints of overgrown or fallen trees on abandoned lots. I know that's not something that you currently deal with, but could it be something in the future if we increased your strike team or gave you more resources that you could deal with?
Yes, ma'am. I think that's exactly the sort of thing that team could do. If it's debris, if it's a fallen tree, if it's graffiti, tires, absolutely. I see them as a multi-use entity. Small team to start. Let's try it, see if it works. I'm sure we'll be able to make a lot of progress. We'll change its operations as we get feedback, but I think that's probably the best way to handle it.
Yeah, no, I think, listen, the idea of a strike team coming out, and even if we could pilot it in one district that really needs attention, and then see if we could have multiple strike teams, that might be something that works, so that we can at least try to make the most impacts with the fewest people. Council members, any questions?
Hey, Mr. Mulligan, is it possible to identify individuals who are willing to cut the grass, maybe contract with them in certain neighborhoods, so that way that takes some of the burden off of code enforcement?
Well, it is possible, Councilmember King, and in fact, I've had some interest in doing that. They would have to go through the regular procurement process. But I think really our vendors, we do have a few things we're working through them with, but generally speaking, we've been happy with the performance of the vendors. So really the issue for us is more internal. It's really the inspections. There's a lot of blight, a lot of vacant lots out there, and we've got one person who has to respond to complaints and do sweeps when he has the time. And as always, title research. So I think if we can unstick those parts of the operation, that's going to be most important. Anytime, speaking generally now, anytime we can enlist private actors, nonprofit actors to work with us, we're more than happy to do that. That's great added value. As I say, there are complications, maybe a procurement complication, but the thing to do is send them right to me, and I'm happy to talk to them about specifics.
Well, all right, I'm not talking about anything major. I'm talking about a guy who has a side hustle cutting grass, and he has a lawnmower, pickup truck, and a weed eater. But he lives in an area there's 4 overgrown lots. it may be difficult to do the whole procurement process, and this property is just getting higher and higher. That's what I'm talking about. Can we cut through that red tape? Or maybe that's not a question for you, maybe for the administration or civil service or whoever else. That's what I'm talking about.
Sure. So they certainly can. I don't see offhand any issues with them simply doing that on their own. And there are many homeowners, community neighborhoods who care for blighted lots because they know the owner isn't going to deal with them. And so maybe those are on our radar and maybe they're not, because our inspectors go out and there's nothing wrong with the lot because the community is dealing with it. But if they want to integrate themselves into our operations in an official capacity, that's where I think it would just have to be on a case-by-case basis, understand their capabilities, understand what their interest is, and then making sure that everything is done above board and we've checked all the boxes. But again, I'm more than happy to look into any opportunities like that.
All right, my last two issues, two properties on LB Landry. So one is in the 1400 block of LB Landry, and it's next to a formerly blighted property that someone has taken over, has fixed it up, and he's made that his property, his residence, he and his wife. But the neighbor has this large lot and it grows to about 4 or 5 feet. They cut it every 3-4 months, and so it keeps happening. So they don't get fined because there's not enough people to catch it. And they cut the grass, but 8 months out the year, the neighbor has to live with this grass that's at least 4 to 5 feet. And they contact me to get the cut, and it's kind of that cat and mouse game. They come out and cut it in January, grows back in April, they cut it in April. So how do you prevent that? It seems like these repeat offenders that are the issue. And another property like that is in the 1000 block of LB Landry. It's next to an elderly lady, and the property is at least as tall as me, and it's been like that for quite some time. And it may come get cut out, get cut once or twice a year. So how do you prevent those repeated offenders with the overgrown lots?
So Councilmember King, I think the key with a case like that is to pursue it through 2 tracks. So we have this grass cutting program, we get to it within 6 weeks. But at the same time, this is a violation of the city's minimum property maintenance code. And very often in a case like that, there's going to be other violations, rodent harborage, for example, other things. And so we need to pursue a case in that way too. And this, I think, goes to Councilmember Giarruso's questions about daily fines and how we can really take decisive action against long-term problematic properties. And I'll certainly be responding to this list of legislative changes, and I'm very encouraged that we have a number of excellent ideas here and the work that his staff has done on developing these. But I think that's the answer. So we'll get some temporary relief to the community through this Chapter 66 program, Chapter 26, especially with really robust daily fines process, will allow us to levy serious fines, foreclose on the property, and get it into the hands of someone else. If we expand Mo to own, which we intend to do, that might make it eligible. Part of it is communication. Let people in the community know this is something we do with some frequency. Hey, this is a problematic lot. We're going to be taking action against it. We're going to be levying fines. Maybe you want to make an offer to the owner. It's really an all hands on deck kind of situation. I think the more tools we can put towards the problem, the better.
So the property I'm talking about is my last comment at it's at 1035 LB Landry. It's the owner, and then it says care of City of New Orleans. So who cuts the grass? Like, who's actually in charge of the property?
So in that case, we'd have to look at the research a little bit, but in that case, it's likely an adjudicated property. Until it's sold, the owner should be, if I am correct about the law, I'm not a lawyer, but the owner should be taking care of that property. And so they should be cutting the grass. If they don't, we're going to do it and either fine them through Chapter 26 or put those costs on them through Chapter 66. But if there are technical title questions or questions about ownership, especially ownership on a particular property, I can look into it and then send you the specifics.
All right, so I'm looking at the taxes it's been taxed and fined since 2017.
So that
They may
could be.
they may be deceased and they're just overgrown grass now.
So this may be a case where it's about to get ripe. That 5-year adjudication period is ending, and it might be a good candidate for Mo to own.
Well, I'll get with you afterwards. I don't want to delay it,
Yes, sir.
prolong the meeting. Thank you.
Anita, any public comments? All right, Thomas, thank you so much for talking blight with us. I look forward to working with your office specifically on the 10 properties and a total of 50 properties identified with you today, and the rest of my 38 properties as well. And also looking forward to scheduling a ride through so that we can look at our lots and other problem issues in District B. And I'm sure all of the other district council members would like to do that as well.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
And I think Ms. DeQueer wants to talk to you after this. Thank you. With that, I move to adjourn. Seconded by Councilmember King. All in favor? Thank you.